I've been getting a lot of questions about the Fraser Prophecy and this letter that we see Bree holding in the preview for next week's episode, so let's talk about it. As always, this will have spoilers for the books and the shows, so if you're looking to avoid this, please do keep on scrolling. So I've made a video about the Fraser Prophecy during the first half of season 7, but I did want to do a refresher because we are approaching the moment in the books where Bree learns about the prophecy via a letter from Frank. In order to explain what's going on and what's going to happen, I want to do a little comparison between the book plot and what's been shown in the show and just tell you how it goes in the books. So in the books, after Bree leaves Lallybroch and escapes from Rob and his men, her and Fiona's husband Ernie pull over at a cafe, and while they are there, Rob's cousin Lionel Menzies approaches them and says that he had been heading to Lallybroch to check on Bree and the kids after he heard that Rob had kidnapped Jemmy. Bree then tells Lionel that Rob had come to her house and tried to grape her, which the show did not have that happen, and explains that Roger is gone because he went to Orkney to go after Rob, thinking that that might be where he took Jemmy. She figures Orkney is a location that's far enough away that Lionel won't have any questions about it. She doesn't tell Lionel, obviously, about the Jacobite gold and the Spaniard and everything else that she believes that these men are after her for. While talking to Lionel, she asks him if he's heard of a man named Michael Callahan, which is, as we know, Captain Richardson, because she had pulled off his head covering and remembers it in her pocket. Lionel says yes, he has heard of him and believes that he is an archaeologist with the Orkney Research Center. Rob Cameron, in the books they explain earlier, used to go on archaeological digs in the Orkneys, which is likely how he met him. In the books, when Bree is talking to Fiona earlier on, she actually mentions Callahan to Fiona and says that he is a friend of Roger's. Bree believes that the archaeological digs up in the Orkneys are what made Rob Cameron interested in the Stone Circles to begin with. After her conversation with Lionel Menzies, she asks if he could bring her and the kids back to Lallybroch just to make sure that it's safe, and at that point Lionel suggests that maybe she go hide in America. That night, Bree is up in the study thinking about what to do and crying about Roger and how much she misses him. She reaches into the desk to write a letter to Roger and remembers that there's a secret compartment within the desk itself. Now, in the shallow drawer, there are paper clips and rubber bands, but there's also a tube of lipstick that someone had left at their house one night at dinner, and Bree uses that to kiss the letter to Roger and wants to hide it within the desk. When she places the letter to Roger inside the desk, she actually sees another letter that had been taped up inside the desk with scotch tape and pulls it out of the desk to read it. That letter has the initials BER on it, and it's titled Dearest Deadeye, which is what Frank Randall used to call her as a child. Now, this is when we get into what the contents of the letter from Frank are, which the first time I read this, it absolutely blew my mind. In the letter, Frank says that Bree had just left him after they had gone out to shoot clay pigeons together, and he can't decide if he feels pride at her abilities or fear that she might one day have to use them. Bree remembers that at the time they went shooting, she was about 15, and Frank ended up passing away shortly after her 17th birthday. Frank explains that he knew that Bree was a time traveler at the time he's writing the letter, but is unsure when she would find out, if at all she found out about her abilities. He also says he had hoped to tell her himself when she was older. His time in the service during the war made him very aware of secrets and conspiracy theories. And he says if she's reading this letter, it's likely he is not alive at this point. But after the war, he found himself wanting to confide in someone, and so he did in Reggie Wakefield, which is, as we know, Roger's caretaker and guardian. He then tells Bree that he is not her biological father, which he's unsure if she knows because he had asked Claire to swear to him that she would not tell Bree unless he had passed away, so he's assuming that he must be dead at the time that she's reading the letter. And he explains to Bree what happened with Claire, that she had traveled back to 1743 and returned 3 years later claiming that she had time traveled and came back pregnant, and if that were true, it would mean that Bree is likely able to do that as well. And over time, Frank started to realize that Claire wasn't going crazy and there might have been some merit to what she was saying. So that is when he started researching Jamie all throughout history. Through that research, Frank learned about a man named the Bronze Seer. His name was also Kenneth Mackenzie. And he had a great number of prophecies around the 17th century, one of which was called the Fraser Prophecy. That prophecy was pretty vague when Frank had begun to research it, but the relevant part that he took away was that the Bronze Seer believed the last of Lord Lovat's line would one day rule Scotland. Within the letter, he also attached a birth chart for Bree to reference, and he said that he had been given this birth chart from Reggie Wakefield, who had been given it, had received it, I should say, from the wife of a man who was also very interested in the Stuart cause and the Lovat family, since they were local to Inverness. Frank also says at that point that he knew a Simon Lovat when he was in the war, who was in the Commandos and then the Special Forces. So then he starts to explain to Bree the family tree, starting with the old fox who we met in season 2, who was executed for treason during the 45. And then he points out that his son, the young fox, ended up dying without having any children. And the other brother, Archibald, also passed away without any children. The line then starts to reference illegitimate children because the old fox was not known to be faithful to his wives, and there were 2 that were referenced: Alexander, who had gone and joined the church in France, and Brian Fraser, who we know is Jamie's father. At this point, Bree is upset because Jenny is part of this line. She has children. Why does this make Brianna special? And Frank points out that the current line of the Frasers of Lovat is a collateral branch, and for some reason the Fraser Prophecy isn't referring to them, and he didn't know who drew this chart, but is having a hard time believing that it could even be true. But because it was made by someone, that's evidence enough for him that this is something that is alarming. He also says that when he was doing research into this, he did find Jamie and Claire's marriage certificate and noticed that she used Beecham instead of Randall when she was married, and makes a joke about how that upset him. But all of this is to say that Bree is obviously a person of great interest. If she can in fact go back in time and return, and is also the subject of this prophecy. He knows that if someone in the government would find out that she has these abilities, that she would be watched and potentially approached, but he's also concerned about private parties who would be interested in her. Having people know that someone who fits this prophecy is also a time traveler would put Bree in a great amount of danger, because he thinks that people who believe firmly in these prophecies would do dangerous things if they knew she existed. He says to her that he will do his best to try and find out who made this family tree and try to neutralize them, but realizes too that people who believe in conspiracies often are in packs, so he might not be able to neutralize every threat. He then warns her not to go near anyone in the service or anyone associated with it, and if worse comes to worse, she may have to use her abilities to hide in the past, as it might be the safest place for her. He also says that he believes that she could go back to Jamie because Jamie had entrusted Claire to Frank, and Frank knows that he could do the same with Jamie and entrust Brianna's protection with him as well, if need be. He ends the letter saying that he knows whose child Brianna truly is, and signs off with, "All my love, Dad." Now, shortly thereafter, Bree actually brings the kids to California and takes them to Disneyland. She sends a letter to Boston to Joe Abernathy, and Joe recognizes that she is no longer in Scotland because the postage stamp is an American one, and things kind of snowball from there. I think that would require a separate video, which I think I'm going to make just in case the show does not tackle this storyline in the way that the books did, just so you have a full picture of how it goes in the books. Obviously, this is a lot of dense material. It's pulling back a lot of plot from previous books, and some things have already been brought up and mentioned in the show, but hopefully this paints a fuller picture for you as to what this letter entails and what the Fraser Prophecy is and how it is affecting Brianna.